In this video, we're taking a look at two of Xeroshoe's winter boots. We're comparing the Denver with the Xcursion Fusion. So let's dive straight into our shut test and see how each one of these perform compared to each other. And if you don't know what the shut test is, go ahead and check it out up here in this video. So S is for sole. The Denver boot has a really nice, thin, flexible sole. It provides a good amount of ground feel while still providing some traction with these lugs. Now these lugs are 3.2 millimeters, rest of the sole is 3.8, so that brings us to a grand total stack height of 7 millimeters. But that's assuming you remove the, I believe, 2 millimeter insole that comes with it, which is what I do with all my Xeroshoes. So these come in at a stack height of 7 millimeters. Meanwhile, the Xcursion Fusion comes in all the way at 12.5 inches for stack height, but the lugs are a little bit bigger. They come in at 3.5 millimeters. That being said, they're not nearly as thin, not nearly as flexible. They actually feel pretty darn rigid, in my opinion. You do not get the same ground feel that you would get in the Denver, and it feels like a boot. It lives up to its name of being a boot. It feels pretty clunky. I really dislike this on hard surfaces like concrete because I just feel like I'm clunking around. Versus with the Denver boot, it's still only 7 millimeters. It's pretty thin, so I don't really mind being on hard surfaces. So if I'm going to the store or working all day or anything like that, the Denver boot feels way better on man-made surfaces. And part of that is also, you'll notice the lug spacing is very different. The spacing on the Xcursion Fusion is much wider, which does mean when you're on really slick mud or dirt or that mixy slush of snow that's melting, which you might even be able to hear outside right now, you do get better traction with the Xcursion Fusion from purely a sliding standpoint. However, you don't get as good of ground feel, so your foot's not wrapping around those sticks and rocks like they would in the Denver boot. So at the end of the day, between these two soles, I much prefer the Denver boot, with the rare exception of if it's really slippery, then I might grab these just for that extra bit of traction. But at the end of the day, I'd rather have better ground feel and therefore improve my balance in that way than just have bigger, better spaced lugs and get better traction from that sort of from that sort of thing. Next, we have H for heel. Now, as with all Xeroshoes, as the name implies, they are zero drop, so the heel is not raised on either of them. Again, the overall stack height is higher, but it is level front to back on both the Xcursion Fusion and on the Denver, so they both pass with flying colors, and we'll call that a tie. Next, we have U for upper, but before we dive in, if you're finding this video useful, make sure you hit that subscribe button, and if you do decide to buy one of these pairs of boots, feel free to purchase from the affiliate links down below in the description, because that's what helps me keep buying a ridiculous amount of minimalist shoes and telling you all about them. Okay, U for upper. So you'll notice these are actually pretty different. The biggest thing you may notice first and foremost is the Xcursion Fusion has 2 rows of hooks on the top, whereas the Denver just has the grommets all the way up. Now, despite them both having the same height of the top lace connection points, I don't know if you can see that very well, the Xcursion Fusion feels extremely restrictive when you have it laced all the way up. And that's because the upper on this one is pretty stiff, whereas the upper on this one collapses right down. So even though this height is the same, I never lace the Xcursion Fusion all the way up to the top. I always do it on the second one. If you skip both hooks, it just flops around and isn't a comfortable shoe. If you do that first hook, at least when I do it, it is pretty comfortable and it doesn't limit my range of motion as much. But with both of these, because they are boots and boots come above your ankle, they do limit your dorsiflexion, which is your knee coming over your toes. So that's just something to keep in mind, that when you purchase these, they're not going to feel like your running shoe. They're not going to feel like your casual shoe. They're going to feel a little bit like a boot. But again, the Xcursion Fusion is significantly stiffer in the upper and limits you a whole lot more than the Denver boot does. The reason I want a minimalist shoe is to be as close to barefoot as possible, and even in boots in winter conditions, I still want to have more range of motion than the Xcursion Fusion provides. The Denver is pretty good. It isn't the same as, again, being barefoot because it's a boot, but it is significantly better, in my opinion, from a range of motion standpoint than the Xcursion Fusion. As far as warmth goes, they feel pretty much the same, with the Denver feeling slightly better. The Denver comes with this great liner that as soon as you put your foot in, it feels pretty warm. Once you're wearing these for more than 5 minutes though, the heat of your foot warms up the Xcursion Fusion and the Denver boot pretty evenly. I'm gonna call it a tie as far as warmth goes. Now, one of the biggest differences between the uppers on these two is you'll notice in the Xcursion Fusion, it's sewn all the way up the tongue until you reach about 3/4 of the way up, and then it's open. Versus the Denver boot is open all the way down. I can slide my finger right in there. So as far as waterproofness, is that a word? These are technically water repellent canvas, whereas this one, they actually call it waterproof. You still get a little bit of moisture if you're not wearing gaiters or anything like that, because snow does get inside the top when you're wearing it. However, the Xcursion Fusion does have that sewn tongue, so it does keep some of that moisture out a little bit better than the Denver boot. Now, that being said, the Xcursion Fusion also comes with a nice little loop to hook gaiters too. So if you're going through deep snow, you can hook that directly onto that hook, versus you have to work with the laces on this one. It doesn't have that same easy hookup point on the Denver boot. The other thing you'll notice is that the Xcursion Fusion has multiple of the Huarache style straps to get a better fit up your foot. You can see the little loops right here, versus the Denver just has one up here. The other thing is on the Denver, that strap is exposed, so you can get sticks and stuff stuck in there, versus on the Xcursion Fusion, it's actually fused inside, which is, I believe, why they chose that name. So all those straps are underneath a layer of fabric on this upper, so you can't get those stuck on anything. So just, again, another thing to keep in mind. Now, at the end of the day, the upper between these two, I like the fit of the Denver better. That's pretty much a personal preference. Unless you're just going straight up for minimalist, then of course the Denver is going to win hands down because it's way more flexible, versus the Xcursion being fairly stiff and rigid and really living up to that boot name. So that is a look at the upper. Lastly, T for toe box. Both of these have really good toe boxes, and honestly, I like the toe boxes on these boots even better than I like them on the Zero Prio or the Terraflex or any of those other regular shoes. The boots provide a little bit more space, which is especially important because it is a winter boot, so you're probably wearing thick wool socks. So both these toe boxes, in my opinion, are fantastic. They're a tie in my book, and I like them both. So when we get down to it, which do I prefer? It's probably clear by now that I prefer the Denver boot. It's lighter, it's thinner, it's more flexible, it's more minimal overall. And so 9 times out of 10, if I'm gonna grab a boot and I'm ignoring color, I'm gonna grab the Denver boot. And this actually really surprised me when this Xcursion Fusion came out. They looked awesome. I thought I was gonna really like them, but they just don't meet the minimalist criteria as well as the Denver does. They're so much stiffer. They're a lot clunkier. They, in my opinion, feel like I'm wearing a big combat boot. Obviously they're not. Obviously they're way better than that. But for someone who spends as much time in minimalist shoes and barefoot as I do, this just feels like a clunker to me. So unless I'm doing a work project where I need some sort of heavy, robust work boot, this is probably gonna spend most of its time on my shelf. Whereas the Denver is gonna get to come out and play with me a whole lot more and adventure through the forest. That being said, I did call this a work boot. It doesn't have steel toe. It doesn't have any of that protection like you would in a traditional work boot. I'm just saying it's clunky, it's big. I don't like it nearly as much. So take it all with a grain of salt. Figure out what you need in each of these different areas and which boot is gonna be best for you. And if your experience has been different, let me know down in the comments. I'd love to hear what you do in these boots, which one you like better, and how they're treating you as you live life feet first, as they say at Zero Shoes. Thanks so much for watching. Again, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and if you do decide to buy one of these boots, grab it from the affiliate link down below so I can keep telling you all about awesome shoes. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in future videos.